Has this ever happened to you? That the more you tried to prove your worth to someone, the less they seemed to notice? That every word, every gesture, every attempt to hold them closer only pushed them further away? In the silence that followed, you began to wonder if love was nothing but a battlefield of hidden power, and whether the one who cares less always wins. Yet the truth is far older and far deeper than the shallow games of modern relationships. It is the truth the Stoics knew. Power lies not in clinging, but in letting go. A man who embodies detachment is not heartless. He is not indifferent in the way the world imagines. His strength is carved from the understanding that he cannot control another's soul, only his own. Like Marcus Aurelius walking through a world of fleeting emperors and collapsing empires, he knows that every attachment to what is unstable breeds suffering. The one who begs is not weak because they love. It is because they have surrendered their inner command to another. And the one who stands calm in silence, unmoved by storms of rejection, awakens something the other cannot resist: respect, awe, and a longing to return to the fire they once believed extinguished. For what is more intoxicating than a soul no longer enslaved by desire? Women sense it, even if they cannot articulate it. The man who does not chase, who does not unravel, who does not crumble at the withdrawal of affection, becomes a mirror to her own unconscious. He becomes the figure of the father she once admired, the warrior she once dreamt of, the silent archetype who refuses to bend. And in that refusal, he ignites the ancient wound within her, the need to be chosen, not pitied, the need to be desired by one who does not need her, but who could still want her. Modern psychology has given new names to what the ancients lived by: boundaries, self-worth, emotional regulation. Yet at its root, the truth is the same. To beg is to abandon yourself. To detach is to reclaim your throne. When you do not react to silence, you become silence itself, and silence is terrifying. It forces her to confront her own emptiness without your attention as a distraction. It compels her to wrestle with the shadows she avoided, and in that confrontation, she begins to circle back, pulled not by your pursuit, but by your absence. Imagine the difference. One man sends endless messages, his words dripping with desperation, his heart exposed like a wound. The other remains still, like a mountain unmoved by rain. Which man does the soul seek? Which image lingers in the unconscious when night comes, when the bed feels colder, when the mirror reflects back the ache of unchosen beauty? Always the mountain, always the one who did not fall. This is not cruelty, this is order. To detach is not to punish, it is to align yourself with the law of nature. You were never born to chase what does not belong to you. You were born to master yourself, and in that mastery lies the paradox. When you no longer crave, they crave you. When you no longer bend, they bow. When you no longer plead, they plead. And if they do not, you still remain unbroken, because what you sought was never their return, but your freedom. Some men discover this too late. They learn it only after humiliation, after tears, after their dignity has been torn apart in public silence. Others never learn, spending lifetimes chained to the approval of women who were never theirs to hold. But the Stoic man learns in time. He sees that relationships are not a prison for the desperate, but a field for the disciplined. To give love freely is noble, but to depend on it is ruin. And the man who depends on nothing, not her words, not her warmth, not her return, commands everything without ever asking. The woman may leave, she may test, She may draw away into her silence, watching from the shadows to see if you will crumble. But when you do not, when you stand as the embodiment of calm, she feels the shift within her chest. The game she thought she controlled slips from her hands. What began as her choice becomes her longing. What she thought was her power becomes her hunger. And she will remember you not as the man who begged, but as the one she could not conquer. The lesson is simple, yet severe. Attachment enslaves, detachment liberates. When you no longer chase, you reveal who truly holds the weaker ground. You may lose her, yes, but you will never lose yourself. And that is the victory the Stoics prized above all else. Mastery over the only kingdom that matters, the one within. Detachment is not the absence of love, it is the purification of it. When a man withdraws from desperation, his love ceases to be a clinging demand and becomes an offering of strength. Like the disciplined monk who tends the flame without trembling, he embodies a presence that does not suffocate but radiates. The woman, in turn, feels this shift as something unsettling yet magnetic. A love that does not beg is a love she cannot easily dismiss. For in every human psyche lies the craving for what cannot be fully possessed. It is here that Jungian psychology speaks. Every man carries within him the anima, the feminine aspect of his unconscious, and every woman carries the animus, the masculine force within her soul. When a man chases relentlessly, he collapses into his anima, losing balance, drowning in longing. He projects the divine image of the beloved onto a mortal woman, worshiping her as though she were a goddess. But she, being human, recoils under the impossible weight of that projection. She does not want to be worshipped. She wants to be desired by one who still retains his ground. Thus, the detachment of the man restores the polarity. He reclaims his animus, and in that reclamation, he draws her anima toward him. What she felt slipping into imbalance suddenly feels whole again. And her instinct pulls her back to the source of his calm. The Stoics taught this not with romantic words, but with brutal clarity. If you kiss your child, remind yourself you kiss a mortal, Epictetus warned. The same law applies to lovers. She is mortal, fallible, fleeting. To tie your serenity to her presence is to build a palace on sand. Yet when you accept her impermanence, when you can lose her without losing yourself, your love becomes unshakable. Ironically, that is when she clings most fiercely, because she feels the rarest thing of all, a man whose identity is not enslaved by her. Silence, then, becomes a weapon, not the silence of cruelty or punishment, but the silence of mastery. Words lose their power when thrown into chaos. But silence stands as an unanswerable riddle. She expects reaction, panic, pleas. Instead, she meets stillness, and in that stillness, her mind turns inward. Doubt creeps in. She replays memories of your strength, your presence, your touch. Each absence becomes louder than 1,000 declarations of need, and she begins to wonder, if you are not chasing, who might you be turning toward instead? The mind abhors this void, and she fills it with her own longing. This is the paradox of desire. When you no longer seek validation, validation seeks you. Modern psychology frames it as secure attachment. The Stoics called it virtue. Both are the same root. A man anchored in his own being, unshaken by storms, unbroken by silence. When she withdraws and you remain unmoved, you are no longer a man begging for her return. You are the mountain she must climb again if she wishes to feel alive. And so, slowly, the power dynamic shifts. She who once turned away now turns back, not because you pleaded, but because your absence became unbearable. She will test, she will prod, she will seek cracks in your armor, but if you remain whole, she will see that you are not the same as other men. You do not collapse in longing, you rise in sovereignty. That sovereignty calls to her like a forgotten hymn, reminding her of what it means to stand beside a man, not above him. And she will beg, not always in words, but in gestures, in softened tones, in the sudden reappearance of her presence, where once there was withdrawal. For when you no longer fear losing her, you gain something infinitely greater, the truth of who you are. And in that truth, every relationship is transformed, not by control, but by command of self. That is how detachment wins, not by coldness, not by cruelty, but by the unshakable flame of a man who knows he is whole without anyone, and yet chooses, from strength, to share himself. There comes a moment in every relationship when silence becomes heavier than words. The woman who once sought attention begins to retreat, expecting the familiar script. The man running after her, desperate to soothe her doubts. But the Stoic man does not follow the script. He does not collapse into panic, nor does he frantically try to mend what may not be his to fix. Instead, he stands in stillness, and in that stillness, he reveals a truth far greater than persuasion. He reveals mastery of himself. This mastery unsettles her. For most men, when confronted with withdrawal, lose their shape. Their entire being bends toward her absence, as though her presence alone justifies their existence. They become restless, reactive, consumed by an anxiety that bleeds through every message, every call, every plea. Yet the Stoic man refuses this erosion. He is not unfeeling, but he is unbroken. He understands that no amount of begging can compel genuine affection. What is freely given is real. What is forced is hollow. The psychological impact of this detachment is profound. Jung spoke of individuation, the process by which a human being becomes whole. When a man detaches, he enters this path. He separates the illusions of his longing from the essence of his soul. He sees the shadow of his dependency, the desperate child within who once clung to the mother's gaze for validation. And instead of projecting that child's need onto his lover, he holds it within himself, giving it discipline, giving it order. This act of inner containment radiates outward as strength. She senses it, even if she cannot explain why. Women are drawn to men who have mastered their own chaos. The one who detaches is no longer entangled in her tests, her moods, her silence. He is neither cruel nor indulgent, he simply is. And in that being, she confronts her own unconscious. Her silence, once a weapon, turns into a mirror. She begins to feel the edges of her own shadow, the fear of being unworthy, the terror of not being chosen. The man who does not chase forces her to wrestle with herself, and in that wrestling, she begins to long not for any man, but for him, the one who stood when others fell. Modern psychology calls this dynamic differentiation, to stand as a self without dissolving into the other. The Stoics called it freedom. For freedom is not the absence of bonds, but the refusal to be enslaved by them. When you detach, you prove to her and to yourself that your worth is not up for negotiation. You do not become valuable because she stays, nor worthless because she leaves. You are valuable because you exist, because your soul commands itself, because your mind remains sovereign. And paradoxically, this very independence draws her closer. For in a world filled with men who collapse under pressure, The man who does not bend is unforgettable. His silence haunts her more than any argument. His calm unsettles her more than any plea. His absence speaks louder than 1,000 words, because it is not emptiness. It is presence withheld. It is the mountain standing still while she circles around it, realizing the climb is hers to make if she wishes to feel the air at its peak. The tests will not end. She may pull away again, probe again, try again to find weakness in his armor. But each time he remains unmoved, the pattern strengthens. Her power does not dominate him. It awakens her. She remembers what it is to be in the presence of a man who is whole, and she craves it, not because he begged, but because he did not. And so, what began as detachment becomes transformation, not a tactic, not a trick, but a way of being. He no longer fears rejection, because rejection cannot touch what is already whole. He no longer clings to possession, because he has found something greater, command of his own spirit. This is the essence of Stoic detachment in love, not the killing of desire, but the refinement of it. Love becomes no longer a hunger to consume, but a fire that warms without burning. To detach is to reclaim rhythm. Love ceases to be a frantic sprint and becomes instead a measured stride, a calm breathing in and out. The man who no longer trembles at absence discovers a hidden symmetry. What he withdraws from her, he restores within himself. The desperate energy that once leaked outward now fuels his own transformation. And in this transformation, he becomes the very thing she cannot ignore. The ancients understood this paradox. Seneca wrote that, "The greatest empire is to be emperor of oneself." What does this mean in the theater of love? It means that when the heart aches for her presence yet, you choose stillness. You are not repressing your desire. You are disciplining it. Desire becomes fire contained within stone, no longer wild flames that destroy, but a hearth that draws others close. She senses the difference in your gaze, your posture, your silence. It is no longer the gaze of a beggar. It is the gaze of a king who has already crowned himself. Modern psychology echoes the same truth in the language of trauma and healing. When men cling obsessively, it is often the child within crying for the mother who once turned away. Every unanswered message becomes a replay of that ancient wound. But detachment interrupts the cycle. By refusing to chase, the man speaks to his own inner child. We are safe without her. We belong to ourselves. This act of inner reparenting reshapes him. And what reshapes him reshapes the dynamic. The woman no longer faces a child demanding. She faces a man containing. In this containment lies allure. For what is rarer in a world of frantic pursuit than composure? Women are flooded daily by men who perform desperation, texts, flattery, gifts, apologies. Such displays may amuse, but they rarely inspire devotion. Devotion awakens when she feels she is in the presence of something larger than herself. A man who does not need, yet chooses, who does not beg, yet offers, who does not collapse, yet holds open space. This is archetypal. It is why mythic lovers are remembered, not because they chased, but because they stood as pillars that others gravitated toward. Her silence then becomes fragile. What she once believed gave her power now unsettles her, for she expects collapse, and there is none. She expects pursuit and receives calm. Each day you remain unmoved. Her imagination fills with questions. Has he forgotten me? Does he long for someone else? Was my power over him an illusion? This uncertainty gnaws at her until the silence she imposed on you echoes back upon her own soul. In that echo, longing is born. But notice, this longing is not created by manipulation. It is awakened by truth. You are not playing a game. You are embodying order. The same order Marcus Aurelius spoke of when he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. Detachment is not theater. It is the disciplined recognition that her presence is a gift, not a necessity. And when you no longer demand the gift, you begin to receive it freely. So the man becomes like the moon, distant, luminous, untouched by grasping hands, yet always pulling at the tides of her inner world. He does not run toward her, yet she feels herself drawn back, step by step, as if by gravity. And when she returns, it is not to a man broken by waiting. It is to a man whose stillness has made him greater. The man who no longer clings begins to radiate a new kind of presence, one that is not frantic, but magnetic. His very detachment reshapes the air around him. Others notice it first. His walk steadier, his gaze clearer, his speech measured. What once was anxiety has turned into gravity. And a woman, even if she once left, feels this gravity pulling at the edges of her unconscious. She may not admit it aloud, but she senses a shift. He is no longer orbiting her world. She is drifting back into his. This shift is not about dominance, but alignment. In relationships, there are always two forces at play: the longing to merge and the need to remain separate. When a man begs, he dissolves his separateness. He becomes engulfed. She instinctively recoils. But when he detaches, he restores polarity. He reclaims himself as distinct, sovereign, whole. And polarity is attraction's hidden engine. Her longing stirs not because he withheld affection as a tactic, but because he has become once more the mountain she wishes to climb, the riverbank she wishes to rest against. Jung described this as the dance of opposites. The masculine and feminine energies are not enemies, but mirrors. The feminine craves the masculine's grounding. The masculine is enlivened by the feminine's flow. But when the man collapses, the balance is lost. He drowns in her currents, and she loses the very stability she sought. Detachment restores the balance. He does not abandon her. He simply refuses to abandon himself. And in this refusal, he awakens the feminine's ancient longing to be met by a man who cannot be consumed. Silence becomes his language, not the silence of punishment, but the silence of unshakable calm. In that silence, she is forced to listen to the echoes of her own thoughts. Where is he? Why does he not crumble? Why does his absence feel heavier than another's presence? This spiral of questions becomes her shadow work, though she may not recognize it. His stillness turns her gaze inward, making her confront the places in herself that seek control, that fear rejection, that crave validation. And through this confrontation, she begins to realize she misses not just his presence, but the way his presence steadied her. The Stoics would have called this discipline of desire. To desire without dependence, to love without need. It is the highest form of freedom. For freedom is not found in severing ties with others, but in never letting those ties enslave you. The man who embodies this freedom becomes luminous. He does not shout, he does not beg, he does not chase. Yet wherever he goes, his presence lingers, like the quiet glow of a lantern in the night. She may wander, she may test, but eventually she feels drawn back, not by his hands, but by the field of his being. And when she returns, she does so with a new awareness. The man she left is not the man who stands before her now. He is greater, calmer, deeper. She may not use the word stoic, she may not speak of individuation, but she feels the result, a man who is no longer shaken by her silence. And paradoxically, that makes her voice long to be heard again. The woman who once believed she could step away without consequence now begins to feel the emptiness echoing back at her. It is not your anger she remembers, nor your pleading. It is the calm you carried when she expected chaos. That calm unsettles her because it exposes a truth she would rather not face. She does not hold the entirety of your soul. You belong to yourself, and that is what makes you irresistible. For every heart craves what it cannot fully possess. A man who dissolves into her shadow, who begs and bargains, may feed her vanity for a season, but he starves her soul. She cannot respect what she controls, but the man who detaches gives her something different, an anchor she cannot shake, a mystery she cannot solve, a flame that warms without ever burning itself out. In his silence, he reveals both strength and restraint, paradoxically, creates desire. Jung would describe this as the return of the archetypal masculine, the figure who does not bend under emotional storms, who carries within him the stillness of the king and the discipline of the warrior. Women sense this archetype instinctively. It speaks to something primal, something woven deep into the psyche across generations. And when she feels it, she cannot help but return, not always with words, but with gestures, with glances, with the sudden reappearance of her presence, where before there was absence. The Stoics understood this, long before psychology gave it a name. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that all things external are fragile, fleeting, beyond his command. To anchor one's peace in them was folly, but to govern the self, that was power. And when this law is lived within love, it transforms the dynamic. The man no longer waits to be chosen. He stands as one who chooses. He may choose her, but he may also choose to remain apart. The difference is sovereignty, and sovereignty cannot be faked. If detachment is only a mask, she will sense the trembling beneath it. True detachment is not a tactic. It is a transformation. It is the knowledge that even if she never returns, you remain whole. And paradoxically, that wholeness calls her back more powerfully than any plea could. Modern psychology frames this in the language of secure attachment. A man who is secure does not grasp, does not chase, does not crumble when space appears. He remains steady, confident in his worth, clear in his boundaries. And this security draws others like a magnet, for it offers what the world rarely gives: stability amidst uncertainty. So she returns, not because she pities you, but because she cannot stay away. Her silence becomes unsustainable, her absence unbearable. She longs once more for the man who did not fall apart. And when she does return, she finds not desperation, but presence, stronger, calmer, more radiant than before. This is how Stoic detachment wins, not through control, but through surrender of control. Not through tactics, but through truth. For when you no longer beg, you are no longer bound. And the one who is unbound is the one others cannot help but seek. There is a deeper transformation that begins to unfold once a man fully embraces detachment. What was once merely a tactic to survive heartbreak becomes an initiation into sovereignty. He discovers that the energy once wasted on proving himself to her can now be poured into becoming himself. His silence is not an empty void, it is fertile ground, and out of that ground grows strength, vision, and presence that no rejection can erase. The woman senses this shift. She feels the new weight of his being whenever his name crosses her mind. What unsettles her is not cruelty, but the undeniable reality that he does not orbit her anymore. He has become the center of his own world, and whether she admits it or not, she finds herself circling back. For the feminine is drawn to the masculine, not when it chases, but when it stands firm. This dynamic is as old as myth. Think of Odysseus, tested by gods and sirens, yet unbroken in his journey home. His strength was not that he begged for mercy, but that he endured. In the same way, the Stoic man does not beg for her to stay. He endures her absence without shattering, and endurance becomes a lure. She wonders how a man can carry such silence, such calm, without collapsing. The mystery feeds her longing more than any speech could. In psychological terms, this is individuation in action. He is no longer the fragmented self, grasping for completion in another. He has integrated his shadow, faced the wound of abandonment, and come out whole. This wholeness radiates as confidence, as composure, as a subtle authority that requires no announcement. It is not arrogance, because it is not performance. It is simply presence. The presence of one who knows who he is, with or without her. And here lies the paradox. When he no longer fears her loss, she begins to fear his absence. When he no longer begs for her return, she begins to beg for his attention. What he released returns, but it returns transformed, not as pity, but as desire, not as control, but as pursuit. She realizes that while others may crumble for her, he does not, and it is precisely that resilience that makes her crave his presence again. This is not about manipulation. It is about truth. The truth that clinging breeds weakness and detachment breeds strength. The truth that no relationship can thrive on need alone. It must be grounded in choice. And when you no longer chase, when you no longer beg, you stand revealed as a chooser. You may choose her, but you are not compelled. And that is the most intoxicating power of all. The Stoics knew it well. To live free is to live unattached to what may be taken. Love, when purified by detachment, becomes not a chain, but a flame. Steady, disciplined, luminous. And in that light, the one who once left cannot help but turn back, drawn by the very calm she thought she could escape. There is a point where her longing transforms into a quiet desperation, though she may mask it with pride. What unsettles her is not the memory of your affection, but the memory of your restraint. For affection is common, restraint is rare. Any man can shower her with attention, but only a man who governs himself can withhold it with dignity. That dignity pierces deeper than desire. It awakens reverence. The Stoics wrote of this often. To govern oneself is to live as a free man. A man enslaved by passion is no man at all, but a captive of impulse. Yet the one who holds his desire, disciplines it, tempers it with silence, becomes sovereign. She may have thought she wanted your weakness, but what she truly longed for was your strength. And now, confronted with it, she finds herself caught in the paradox. She fears losing what she cannot control. In psychological language, this is projection dissolving. At first, she projected onto you the role of the desperate admirer, the one who would always follow. But when you stepped out of that role, her projection collapsed. The unconscious does not like collapse. It seeks resolution. And so she returns, not because she pities, but because her psyche demands the restoration of balance. Your silence created a vacuum, and the human heart cannot endure a vacuum for long. It must fill it, and she fills it with her return. But here lies the true test. When she comes back, do you fall again into old patterns, or do you remain anchored? The man who merely pretends detachment will crumble at her first touch, proving the silence was a mask. But the man who has become detachment itself remains steady. He welcomes her presence, but he does not depend on it. He receives her not as a drowning man clutching for air, but as a sovereign who opens his gates by choice. And in that choice lies his true victory. She will feel this difference. She will sense that her presence is appreciated, but not required. And this unsettles her in the most delicious way. It makes her effort matter, makes her pursuit meaningful, makes her devotion feel earned. For love without choice is no love at all. It is addiction. But when you choose her from strength, she feels herself chosen in truth, and that truth binds her more tightly than chains ever could. Thus, detachment does not destroy intimacy. It deepens it. It purifies love of desperation, leaving only the flame that burns steady, silent, unyielding. And in that flame, the one who once turned away finds herself circling back, drawn to the man who mastered himself and therefore mastered the dance of love. There comes a moment when detachment matures into something far greater than resilience. It becomes quiet radiance. The man who no longer begs, no longer trembles, carries within him an aura that needs no explanation. He is not louder, but deeper, not more forceful, but more undeniable. His silence has carved him into stone, and from that stone glows a calm light that others cannot turn away from. The woman feels this glow in subtle ways. When she recalls you, it is not the memory of words, but of presence that returns. The way you carried yourself without demand, the way you withheld without cruelty, the way you stood without collapse. This memory begins to trouble her, not because it hurt, but because it revealed something she cannot find elsewhere. The truth that your love was not fragile. It was strong enough to survive without her. And that is the kind of love she cannot easily forget. From a Jungian view, this is the completion of individuation. You are no longer a man split between longing and fear. You have integrated your shadow, the needy boy, the abandoned son, and risen beyond him. You have stepped into the archetype of the king, whose worth does not depend on the approval of his queen, but whose presence commands her devotion all the same. The king does not chase, for he knows his throne is within. He does not beg, for he knows what he offers is rare. He simply waits, and in his waiting, others choose to serve. The Stoics would call this equanimity, a mind so steady it bends neither to despair nor to ecstasy, but holds the middle path of discipline. This is not the coldness of indifference. It is the warmth of controlled fire. For to detach is not to kill desire, but to refine it into something noble. You love without needing. You care without clinging. You give without expecting. And in that freedom, paradoxically, you become the one who is most desired. Her begging may not come in words. It may come in the way she lingers near, the softness in her eyes, the sudden eagerness to share what once she withheld. It may come in her silence breaking, not yours. And when it does, you will know the truth, that your detachment was never about her return. It was about your rebirth. For the final stage of this path is freedom. The freedom to love without chains, to live without fear, to walk away without loss. You no longer measure yourself by who stays or who leaves. You measure yourself only by the strength of your own command. That command is eternal, and from it flows a peace the world cannot steal.